Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Hi. Welcome to Ascended Heart Navigators with Nataraja and Meka. Tonight, we are interviewing one of my best friends and most poetic inspirations in my life, the great, oh my goodness, Hyejung. I want to tell everyone everything about you. Let's start with like your incredible resume as a poet. You are a top of your class at Harvard graduate.
Not
Okay.
top of my class, but
Oh my gosh. And then you got your master's at NYU, and then you also taught poetry there, right?
I did. I taught a couple of years
Wow.
doing workshops and also teaching freshman comm, so expos.
Awesome. And then you also continued your poetic journey as becoming a mother, and
It is a poetic journey.
that is,
Yes, definitely.
and you're also an amazing pianist who just loves to play. You're an example of playfulness, and that's why I dressed up tonight, is because Nataraja did a playful parade on Saturday in Oregon, and you are constantly making sure that you're keeping playfulness alive as well, Hyejung. And so I dressed up because we're going to collaborate on a new project, the heart healing project, and it's all about telling the fairy tales for a new dimension, for pulling different ideas from different dimensions, being different aspects of self. So of course I'm a fairy, insect, frog creature because it just happened. And you sometimes do that. You'll start playing with makeup, or you'll just start playing piano, or you'll just start writing incredible poetry. So most recently you've been published in a couple of journals. I think specifically on Asian American work that was featuring spell work. Is that true?
Well, I'm working on an essay that's hopefully will be included in an anthology that will hopefully be accepted, which is looking at poetry as spell casting, specifically through a BIPOC lens. And so I was working on an essay on poetry as prayer, which is actually kind of funny because prayer has not been a part of my life, generally speaking. But it's something that I feel has a lot of connections to poetry in terms of attention, in terms of like an address, sort of calling out. But I think also, prayer tends to be an outwards. There's kind of an invocation, whether it's to God and like a Judeo-Christian kind of tradition, or Greek mythology or Greek invocations with Homer and things like that, or Sappho who will invoke Aphrodite in the poetic traditions. But I also see how sometimes that calling out that we're doing is actually a calling in, that we are connecting to our own intuition, our own higher self, that is not always an outward entity or an outward divinity, or sometimes it is, but it's actually connecting to our own inner selves at the same time, if that makes sense.
Doubt.
Yeah,
that's actually indicative of what's happening with 5D reality and the age of Aquarius. They say it's moving the idea of divinity from outward to inward. That's one of the aspects of the new earth, the new frequency that we're in. So have you noticed that coming up in your work?
It's interesting because I feel like during this year of pandemic, one of the things that I've really been, and I originally was saying I was struggling with, was anger, was rage. One of the poems that I wrote, which is called Spring Coronal, and it has this image of this crown of rage. It is this like overtowering crown. And it was something that I kept sort of wrestling with, but lately, and it was part of it kind of clarified actually with the anti-Asian stuff that happened in Atlanta the killings there. And, I feel very lucky that lots of different people have reached out to see, how are you doing? But honestly, my biggest feeling is one of rage. It is of anger, not fear. There's grief, but it's really sort of rage. And I'm recognizing that this is not something to be ashamed of, not something that I have to be fighting with, that this is really a companion, that this is something that is a teacher, and that I've really been trying to go from wrestling to embracing, to understanding, to listening, to, because anger always has a reason, right? So it's trying to understand what is it trying to tell me, right?
Wow.
What is it trying to tell me? And it's interesting too how you were talking about fairy tales, and there's the sanitized version of fairy tales, but then there's also the fairy tales, where it's very much about a lot of violence, a lot of just really powerful, and often seen as scary kinds of emotions manifesting in the story, and it's kind of it's contained by the story, it's channeled by the story, and so it's that thing where it seems you can say it's just a story, right?
Right.
But really, the story is a vessel for so much potential, so much learning. It allows us to tap into the things that we might feel uncomfortable tapping into in our daily lives. And so, but I'm feeling where, it is in our daily lives. We just tend to turn away from it
Right.
until it's really comes right there. And so I guess it might connect to kind of shadow work or things like that. So that is something that I've been really sitting with,
Wow.
not wrestling with, sitting with, to figure out what needs to happen, both inwardly and outwardly. Because I think a lot of times, especially in these kinds of moments where we see, just sort of systemic oppression and limitation, and the way that we internalize them, right? We internalize these things. So it's a matter of unlearning it the way we've absorbed it. And I think that's the first thing. It's untangling those self-imposed limitations, which gives us the tools to think about how to untangle it in a larger way.
Wow.
And then poetry helps because it's language, right? And that's part of what I've been thinking about and writing about for a long, again, it really clarified just in the last couple of years, where it's like, I believe language is magic in that we're trying to make a new reality, right? And that language allows us, like, we can't make a new world if we don't know what that world is going to look like, what it's going to feel like. And there's a huge place, of course, for non-verbal meaning and understanding too. But I also feel that so much of our world creation is through language. At least it's sort of the scaffold, right? We need the words to start us. And then there's all the space for other kinds of feeling and understanding that may or may not depend on language, but how the way that we can communicate those possibilities so that it's not just within ourselves is through language, right? And whether that's art, music, the written word, things like that too. So those are all things that I've been thinking about. Poesis goes back to the Greek for to make, right? The maker, which is also one of the sort of ways of God as the creator kind of thing. So there's sort of affinities, I think, between making and making, right?
Yeah.
Let there be light, and there was light. So that's
The
kind
words
of those
create.
classic. It's performative utterance. So it's a way of thinking about language that was theorized by, J.L. Austin, I think. And so it's talking about how the act of uttering the language is in itself part of what makes a thing happen, right?
Absolutely.
And there are traditional ones like a marriage vow, right? With this ring I do thee wed, and it actually happens, right? With the words, with the pronouncing the words, I pronounce you man and wife, no, things like that.
Wow.
And so it's a way of, and it's funny because within his theory, he says like poetry doesn't count, but I beg to differ. I do think that, poetry is trying to make things happen through language, through the utterance of the language, and I really do. I mean, when we read silently, we'll still we hear it right in our heads. So I think it does have to do with, like the vibration of the words, the way
Yes.
the sound waves move through, through my body, and then through the air, and then through to whoever is able to listen and hear and receive.
So it's manifestation and magic. What about the medicine of storytelling and poetry and sound? Do you also believe that it becomes a healing or a medicine?
Yes, definitely. And again, there's the inner healing that can occur with writing.
Yes.
There's private writing, and then there's public writing, and then there's also the places where, what seems like a very specific or personal or private kind of language or experience is really connected to our whole human experience, right?
Whoa.
Um,
Yes.
and so when we're able to, um, try to find words that, approximate, move towards, strive towards conveying that, um, then there is magic there too. Again, I think especially now during this time of pandemic, when many of us are isolating for safety for our communities, that aloneness feels even more intense. And so I think all of us are turning to art, music, all these things. You talk about essential workers, right? But part of the essential workers are definitely the art makers, the music makers, the writers, right? Like, what are you turning to when you're alone,
What
right?
makes us feel less alone
Yeah,
is that someone else is sharing in the experience and expressing it in sometimes ways that we can't. So
yeah,
then we don't feel so alone because
exactly. Because
there's
I
some
think we often feel like no one can understand, or no one knows what I'm feeling, or no one knows what I'm going through. And in some ways it's true where there is separation, right? But then I also feel like that's kind of, what is the word, we think that we're discrete entities, but we're really not. We're permeable, right? Things kind of pass in and out of us continually. Even just like on a cellular level, or you talk about the cell as like a semi-permeable membrane, right? And so I feel like we are semi-permeable membranes too. I mean, it's just like emotional contagion, right? People around you are angry, and you get angry. Or or whether it's just physical, I mean, literally physical contagion, people getting sick. I mean, we are so much more, connected in ways with our communities, and not just human communities but non-human communities too, right? Plant, earth, all these things. And I feel like part of what I've also been thinking more about, and also really, it was a beautiful class I took with Janice Lee, who is a shaman and a poet, and she's also trained in the Peruvian tradition. And so she would have us we were doing a generative workshop and exploring Han, which is this Korean American, I mean, not Korean American, but this Korean concept of sort of cumulative pain and suffering and collective sorrow, and kind of unearthing that sort of, it's ancestral trauma, really, that's given this word, within this Korean culture. But so I'm digressing a little bit.
is
But she
hum.
would have us, what's that?
The word is hum.
Han, HAN is how, it's anglicized. But so she would take us through these meditations where she was like, imagine yourself as a plant.
Mm.
It's like, so how do you sense the world as a plant, right? Like, what are the ways that you perceive, right, as this non-human entity? And then she'd have like, so you imagine yourself as this plant, and then you also, as the plant, you perceive your human self, right? So like, how do you perceive that human self? And then
Wow.
like, what message or wisdom as that, what is it that you understand as the plant that you don't understand as a human? And how would you, through your plantness, convey that message or wisdom to your human self?
Wouldn't that be amazing if we did that with each other? You know,
Yes. I mean,
especially like in like divisive groups, if we were like in like his feeling, like imagine if you were this group or this person, you know, how would you feel? And doing this like empathetic exercise into feeling the energy of what the other feels like,
mhm.
which is
Wow.
I love that. That is
Yeah. And I think also too, just, I mean, because we're just so human centric, right? We're so human. And so I think the empathy that happens in connecting to the non-human world, you
right.
know,
Mm-hmm.
for us, and will probably be here after us, right?
Mm-hmm.
That practice of empathy is a radical kind of empathy, but I think it also helps us then be like, well, how do I connect to my fellow human beings?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right? In new ways, and to just imagine that there are new ways to understand, new ways to feel, new ways to perceive.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, it's, you know, we were talking about playfulness, right? And so it's also within a sense of play that we're able to, I think, stretch and consider new things. When we're too serious about ourselves, when we're too serious about things, I think we kind of fall into the established ways of thinking and understanding and all this kind of thing. But that's where all those, you know, internalized self-limitations, you know, all these structures that we've absorbed that really limit us are embedded. So when we're able to get away from them,
It's changing. Yeah. It could change. It is changing.
I
That's
really
what
like the listening to the discussion about poetry as medicine, and the intentionality of poetry, and the word as magic making. And I think that that's not kind of like, you know, poetry like falls into like, you know, a certain style of like literature, and it's not seen and through a different lens of like, let's look at this as like intentionality of weaving magic, and making magic happen through word, the intentionality of thought and the energy of thought through words, and like the whole, you know, like what Meka is doing, the movement of words in a form of sound, and how poetry is part of that. When you're talking about the words, if we're thinking about like thoughts as energy, and the thought becomes almost like a being in and of itself the moment it becomes a word, and the word is like a resonance or a transference, just energetically, but the sound,
yeah,
I
literally energy, right? Material energy, right? It
Yeah.
moves through, and you can't escape it, right? You can't, when the words come, like it inevitably reaches you,
Yeah.
right?
So what do you see yourself? So we're gonna do a heart healing album, and you will be a collaborator on this project.
And I still don't know how exactly.
Exactly.
And that
That's
is
part of
also
the play.
good, right? And that's the other thing that I've really been embracing is just not knowing. And you know,
Yes.
I said that with you too. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to be saying. I don't know what to talking about. I'm no expert. I'm not, but I think that that is a good thing because all of us are moving out of a sense of bewilderment. And I think that, again, it's just like if we can sit with that confusion, if we can sit with the bewilderment, just like we can sit
Yes.
with our anger, whatever that is,
Yes.
right? Like that's the essential space. That's the space of growth. That's the space of change. That's the space of understanding. But it's
Wow.
also deeply uncomfortable, right?
Mhm.
Um, just like anger is deeply uncomfortable. And I think, I mean, we can't always be in like deep, uncomfortable zone continuously because we'll
Right.
just not be able to manage. But I think that it is important for us to not run away from not knowing. It's not a thing to be ashamed of. It's not a thing to be upset about. It's just a state of being. And the more we sit with it, the more, again, it can teach us where we need to be, what we need to see, what we need to do. Like poetry too, you know, I've always felt that poetry is a form of paying attention, right?
Mm.
But I also know that as a mom with kids who aren't listening to you, can feel kind of aggressive. Pay attention. Pay attention, right? Why aren't you paying attention? And so it can actually become a kind of hurtful, like to be told to pay attention can kind of be painful, a directive. But then I've been thinking more that it's not like to pay attention is also to attend, right? Attend. And I also think about partly from being a mom, and I did have for both my births, I had a doula. So, and a
Ah,
doula is a birth attendant, right? It is a person that attends. And I also feel my understanding of shamanic work is also of attendance, right? Particularly when I feel like different traditions, different ways, but particularly with like death, right? This time when we have these major transitions. So it's birth, death, all these kinds of spaces when there's huge things that are shifting. And so we need a centered presence to be alongside us to help us through that space. And so a doula is an attendant. So attention, moving to attending, right? And then to tend, Tend, how we tend a garden, to tend. It's tender, right? And so there's a vulnerability, there's a care behind tending, um, which sometimes can feel a little removed from attention. But so I've kind of feel myself going from attention to attending to tending, this tender sort of care. And then again, like poetry teaches me how to do it. Like the act of writing, the act of like, again, like I don't write knowing what I'm writing about. I
right.
write because I've got no idea what the fuck's happening. I'm like, what? Like, there's a moment of intensity that I don't know how to process, right? That I can't process without, the medicine of poetry, right? That it is a way for me to um, take this thing that is calling for attention, that's calling for tending, right? And to tend to it through language. And in doing that, I tend to myself. And I tend hopefully to the larger world around me when I'm able to share whatever confused, bewildered half discoveries I've managed to find in the course of a poem. So
Wow.
And I love the fact that I feel like it's a little bit similar with you, Hyejung, that Meka was just it's like, I'm gonna be doing this album and I want you involved. And I'm like, I have nothing to do with music really. Um, I'm like, there's very little artistic bone in my body. But there was something that was like an absolute yes. And I think that the same is that you're you're like, I'm not exactly sure how. And I think that this is interesting as we're moving into this space of into a new way of just being in what wants to be. And it's a very uncomfortable place to be in this, like, I don't know what it is, but I feel a yes, so I'm gonna say yes and just see um what wants to be. um and then following through with that, and then and seeing, when I said yes and to Meka's invitation of being involved in the project, then that we had the podcast, but then we also had these healing ceremonies, um, that um, that are now being brought into the process of developing the CD. So I love that you're just being available to say, follow this, where it was like, okay, I'm feeling a yes, there's the unlimited potentiality and what I'm intuitively and let's just like create magic out of that, magic out of that. And I really 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 love what you're talking about, as again going back to the magic and the medicine of poetry, and exploring that more with Meka's CD, and how that, because it is weaving magic, this is definitely a weaving of magic, and it's dealing with the poetry and the sound, um, and I'm very much in the background of um, magical herbalism, and that's part of my background, and doing things with magic and with herbs with intentionality. That's where the power, that's where the real that's where the power is anything with intentionality, and especially when someone is tapping into um their offering as medicine, and there's like, I'm available in this space for whatever artistic thing wants to be, and whatever's inside me is going to be there, and it's going to be, I'm bringing my medicine and offering, because whatever it is that wants to come out is what needs to be received by others.
Mhm. And to get to that point is not an easy place either. Um, I think that a lot of times we have difficulty hearing that inner yes.
Hmm.
Um, it gets drowned out by all kinds of, by screaming children, by like,
Hmm.
both the smaller and larger details of our lives. And again, though, that's why I feel like poetry is a teacher for me, because it tells me to stop, to attend, to listen, to try to listen, and be receptive in ways that, I mean, another thing that I've been only recently doing is trying. So it's a form of Buddhism. It's called Nichiren Buddhism. So this is one where it's focused on, partly one of the main parts of the practice is this chant, which is Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. And it's meaning like devotion to the Lotus Sutra. Um, and that Lotus Sutra, again, I don't know. I've just started doing this chant um, the beginning of February. So I'm not even 2 months in to doing a daily chant for less than 5 minutes. But the sense of it is, in the Lotus Sutra is sort of the main teaching from Buddha. People say it's like the ultimate sutra, but it's ultimately talking about our inner Buddha self, and that is like the pure potential. It is the
Hmm.
pure potential of us, right?
Hmm.
And that, and I mean, I don't have my grandparents, both sets of grandparents were Buddhist. In Korea, they did Chogye Buddhism. Chogye is, or Sam, which is the Korean version of Zen. So I do have a Buddhist lineage, but it's one that I'm separated from. My parents did not, and a lot of people of my parents' generation, you know, are are not observant Buddhists. This is also when Christianity has a longer history in Korea, but it really it found especially fertile space after the Korean War and with the missionaries and the American and the US presence. So there was a lot of conversion to Christianity after the Korean War. And my parents were born during and just after the Korean War. So it's kind of a severed space for me in some ways. But the point, though, is that 4 to 5 minutes, it's a chant. Again, it's sound. It is the sound that is channeling and connecting to this belief of our inner potential, right? And you talk about how we're trying to raise your energy, trying to raise your frequency, literally through the chant, through the act of chanting. And I mean, I've studied, so Buddhism has been a mainly academic area of study for me. Only recently am I trying to see what space of Buddhism may actually be in terms of practice and prayer, right? It actually literally came out of partly from working on this poetry as prayer essay.
Nice.
And I also am just like, this is a Japanese form of Buddhism, this Korean Buddhism, but again, sometimes lineages are not straight lines, right? They can be adjacent, they can be rebuilt. It's that intuitive, what is it that I need to help me understand what it is that I need or want or can be. And the other thing something I felt earlier, but then was like, who am I? Is that, there's the bodhisattva, right? So the bodhisattva, right, is, the enlightened Buddha, but who does not want to go off to nirvana, but wants to help other people reach nirvana, right? It's a sort of a teaching sort of Buddha. But then, and I loved this idea when I encountered it, probably back in high school, probably when I was just getting to know you for the very first time in your time before Meka. I mean, you were always Meka, but
Yes.
in that earlier, more chrysalis kind of phase of us, right? But I was like, but who am I? I was like, but who am I? What kind of hubris is it for me to think that I could be some kind of bodhisattva, right? And now I'm like, why? Why not? Why not? Right? Why do I have to limit myself and say, how dare I consider that my being can help other people reach their own states of radiance and potential and beauty? But yeah, I mean, I'm like 41 now, so it took a long time.
Well, it's kind of cool because I think that there is a humble grace to that sturdy confidence that we gain in life, we're humble enough to go, well, actually, no, our existence is enough and worthy of the most divine expression. And when we embrace that, we kind of realize that it's a humbling, and it's also activating that we are in the most service to all of the planet, all of the divinity, every one of us being that expression of divinity. So when you accept the divinity and love in yourself, you're able to then go, of course, it's in everyone else around me. Of course, we are all divine. Of course, we all have that potential. So I think it is the most humble way to honor each other is to accept that you are a bodhisattva and worthy of enlightenment. Yeah. So, and yes, I was exposed to that form of Buddhism in Japan when I was studying Buddhism over there. I got to experience a couple different temples with a couple different lineages of Buddhism. And that was one of them. And I did find that fascinating because, the other style of Buddhism that I was exposed to is a lot of different activations, a lot of different mantras, a lot of different, work.
Right.
And this one was say this lotus mantra every day for hours, and I was like, oh, very different perspectives, but just doing it, just bringing attention to doing something. That's why meditation, even if it's a couple minutes, you're bringing your attention to your divinity and your potential, and that same is able to be recognized in everyone else and everything, plant life and creatures, and the essence of all the words that are being spread around you all carry that divinity wherever we go because we're bringing attention to it. So thank you, Hyejung. Yeah. And also, ladies, I also don't know what this heart healing project is going to be. It was just like, call the most activated, radiant, healing women in my life. Sometimes I'm sure there'll be a small percentage of men as well, but the most activating people in my life have mostly been women. And the two of you have been some of the most magical women in my life, which is why I reached out to you and being like, well, how can we create healing in the world? How can we create magic? You both are two of the most exquisite examples of daily magic that I have ever witnessed. And I have chills right now saying it. So thank you for trusting me and trusting yourselves on this journey to see what we can create, and see what gift we can be to the world and ourselves, because we're part of that world. So excellent. Yay. I'm excited.
And it's so nice to
you're
see Nataraja here.
I'm so looking forward to, I really am looking forward to a newer and deeper exploration of poetry, even for myself, and seeing how this is going to be woven into your CD project, and seeing this as a very intentional movement and the healing process towards ascension, and how we can be intentional with our words and with the magic that we're bringing in, and your beautiful offering, Hyejung, of the medicine and the magic that you're bringing. I'm so excited to see what wants to be created.
Me too.
Yes. Excellent. Well, let's continue this conversation because we're going to be discovering more and more together.
Mhm.
And I can't wait to, I've always loved hearing your poems throughout my entire, a life. It feels like I've gotten to hear Hyejung's words, being infused into the magic of my life. So I can't wait to share that with others.
And as we post this video, we'll share one of your poems so people can reference your work.
Do you have any references that we can?
I have a number of the poems are published online. I don't have it is a real website, but it's Tumblr, but I use Tumblr for my author website. So
okay.
it's uncooked.tumblr.com. At some point I may, get an actual paid site and all these other things. But in the meantime, I've just been using that to organize and keep things together. But yes, so
we'll include your website in some of your work.
Okay.
The reference.
Thank you.
Yes.
It's good, as I'm looking forward to being on this magical ride with you, Hyejung.
Likewise.
And Meka, thank you for inviting us both.
Yes.
Yay! Yes. We're doing it. All right, well, everybody have an amazing day. You just spoke to two of my favorite women at the same time, which is awesome. And yeah, let's have an incredible journey together. Talk to you soon.
All right. Have a good night. Bye.
Be well, everyone. Take care.